Being a dick and playing video games have gone hand in hand ever since, well, probably since the very first video game was ever released. The introduction of MMORPG simply stepped up the playing field by mixing together the perfect storm of abusable loopholes and thousands of players. Taking advantage of the in-game system architecture to the detriment of others probably comes from a desire somewhere in between power and wanting a laugh. And whilst anyone can be a dick with minimal effort, there are those who transcend us mere mortals and turn it into an art form. The first such honor on our list belongs to a player known as Belen the Noble in the game Ultima Online. Released back in 1997, Ultima has all the features of your classic MMORPG, from robust social interaction to a meaningful progression system, and of course abusable loopholes. What Belen was famous for was looting the items from players who had died of natural causes and then reselling them back for half the price. Now, hang on a minute, you might be thinking, that's not so bad if they died of natural causes. Except it wasn't so natural after all. See, Belen was a high-level tamer in the game, a skill set that allowed control of the game's creatures. The loophole here was that dying to one of her minions or monsters was the same as a natural death as far as the game was concerned. And if you happened to be angry at being legally robbed and took it out on her, well, you might not get your things back at all. Belen was also infamous for the Russian doll trap, where she stuffed 22 booby-trapped chests inside one another. Many died trying to reach the supposedly glorious prize in the center, and when one finally did, all they found was a bundle of wood and a taunting note from Belen. Next on our list is not a single person, but rather a group of people who abused the glitch to wreak havoc in the game RuneScape. Released in 2001, it has become one of the most famous MMORPGs of the past 20 years, surpassing its competitors in sheer content and available player choices. Now, the glitch mentioned came about due to an update in February 2009. The update made it so that the symbol Mew became unreadable, and all who saw it in chat had their games crash, leaving their characters defenseless and presumably dead not long after. The game's public chat became a spamming ground for the now deadly symbol, as tons of trolls suddenly turned into those monsters from Bird Box. The equivalent solution to covering your eyes in this analogy was turning off your chat client. But it got so bad that it forced evacuations and shutdowns of entire sections of the game, until another patch would eventually come around and fix it. The next MMORPG is actually featured twice on our list and is notorious for so many legendary dick moves that it could have its own top 10 list easy. If you haven't guessed it by now, that game is EVE Online, the game that asks what if you had the same boring life you do now, but it's the year 2500 and everything's in space. Of course, just like real life, there are those in the game with the surprisingly common traits of being both stupid rich and huge assholes. That person in this story goes by the name Socratic, a player infamous for being a massive shit talker whilst having enough money to cover his being terrible at the game. To give you an idea of how much he was disliked, there were people being paid to troll him. But a player by the name of Morin decided enough was enough and would hatch a cunning plan to leave Socratic in a perpetual state of tilt. But before we can continue, here's a bit of background information on EVE you must know. First is that all sections of the game are attributed a security level, and that committing a crime in high security space is more dangerous for two reasons. The first is because the game's NPC police, called Concord, react more quickly to hostile action. The second is that crimes in high security space carry more weight and have a greater impact on security level, which is a value assigned to each player. At security level 0, you're considered neutral, whereas if you manage to drop to -5 or lower, well, then even helping you is an offense, and the game actively encourages other players to kill you. Oh, one final note before moving on. If two corporations are at war with each other, members from both entities may freely attack each other in high security space without Concord intervening or any loss of security rating. Now, with all that background, let's look at Morin's plan. First, he befriended Socratic and made him join his corporation. Next, he convinced him that there's easy money to be made by destroying a target which was at war with their corporation that just so happened to be in high security space. Morin's plan was to kick Socratic out of the corporation right before the smart missiles hit their target, meaning Socratic would be guilty of killing an innocent player. And just for good measure, Morin planned on having 13 other innocents warp into the missile's blast radius, making that 14 innocents Socratic would be guilty of slaughtering. Morin executed the plan beautifully, and it worked. Soon as those missiles hit, Concords ended up shredding Socratic's ship, and his security level dropped all the way to minus 9.8. Now this was a humiliation so great that he was never seen from a... Kidding. I'm just kidding. He still kept on playing anyway, but at least the whole incident made those who hate Socratic have a good laugh. For number 2, we look at Terra. Released in early 2011, its developers Bluehole did what all decent MMORPGs do and constantly added new features and expansions. One such feature looked at increasing the game's social dynamics by adding the position of Vanarch, a local lord of sorts who had the power of raising taxes and toggling PvP on and off. The two paths to becoming a Vanarch was either through winning a popular vote or through war, and it was the latter that would cause problems. Because what would happen is these mega guilds would break into two smaller ones and declare war on each other. Except these wars involved less tactics and strategies, and more perpetual suicide by both sides. In doing so, they could elect the mega guild's leader as Vanarch. But eventually, the game's developers decided that pointless warfare in order to amass political power was unfair and unrealistic. Well, maybe not that unrealistic. And finally, our number 1 spot belongs to Eve once more. This time, the honor belongs to a player called Hargoth, a director of the corporation Black Nova, which belonged to one of the largest alliances, known as Band of Brothers. Of course, you didn't get to grow that big without making a few enemies, one of which was called Goonswarm. Well, one day, as fate would have it, a Goonswarm recruiter happened to run into one of Hargoth's alt accounts. Whilst talking, Hargoth expresses his frustration at Band of Brothers and how he's had enough of the alliance and the direction it's headed in. So he does the logical thing and expresses his feelings to his friends and partners, knowing that the best relationships and partners rely on love, strong communication, and... Okay, no, he doesn't do any of that. Instead, he decides to defect, move all war materials and resources to Goonswarm, and then disband the entire alliance. This suddenly left thousands defenseless and in a position where their choices were either to defect or die.
Or you are with the terror.
Adding insult to injury, Goonswarm promptly put in an application for an alliance under the name of Band of Brothers and effectively prevented the alliance from ever getting back its namesake. The story should end there if it wasn't for an ironic twist that takes place a year later, where this time, the Goonswarm CEO decides he's frustrated and bored. So what he does is he takes all of Goonswarm's weapons, money and ships and moves it into the now empty husk of Band of Brothers. He then kicks out all other members, leaving all that cash and resources locked away for nobody to use. And that's our final one, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I know that there are 1,000 more tales to be told, and that this list will only grow with time, so I do hope to make a part 2 in the future. But for now, if you have a list you'd like me to make, just leave a comment down below. King Tut out!